At 11:40 at night, the largest passenger ship in the world struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. But the Titanic disaster did not begin with the ice. It began with warnings, warnings about ice, warnings about lifeboats, warnings about speed, and a rulebook that treated the minimum as enough. The warnings were there. When Titanic left Southampton on April 10, 1912, she was more than a ship. She was a promise made out of steel, luxury, and industrial confidence. The White Star Line had built her for size, comfort, and prestige. Newspapers and passengers called her a marvel. Her watertight compartments and electrically controlled doors made her feel modern in a way few people had ever experienced. But modern did not mean invulnerable. Titanic carried more than 2,200 passengers and crew on her maiden voyage to New York. She also carried only 20 lifeboats, enough space for about 1,178 people. That was not an accident in the paperwork. Under British Board of Trade rules, her lifeboat requirement was based on gross tonnage categories that had not kept pace with ships of this size. Titanic was legal. Legal was not the same as safe. The ship had room for more boats. Early design discussions had allowed for a much larger number. But more lifeboats meant more clutter on the boat deck, more cost, more drills, and a visible admission that even a giant liner might need every seat. The final arrangement satisfied the regulation and preserved the image. The danger was already built into the voyage before the first iceberg warning arrived. During the crossing, the North Atlantic ice field was unusually far south. Ships ahead of Titanic began sending wireless messages. Some reported bergs, growlers, and field ice. Others gave positions that placed danger close to Titanic's route. Captain Edward Smith and his officers received several of these warnings. Some were posted. Some were passed along. Some became part of the ordinary traffic of a busy wireless room. That wireless room was both a safety system and a business counter. Titanic's operators handled navigational warnings, but they were also sending passenger messages. The system depended on attention, judgment, and hierarchy. A warning could be technically received and still fail to change the behavior of the ship. By the evening of April 14, the sea was calm, the air was cold, and visibility was deceptive. A flat sea makes ice harder to see because waves do not break white against the base of a berg. The lookouts were scanning from the crow's nest without binoculars. The ship was still moving fast, near her service speed, through waters where ice had already been reported. This is the heart of the disaster, not one impossible surprise, but a chain of accepted risks. Speed had a logic. Liners competed on reputation. Schedules mattered. Experienced captains had often crossed ice regions at speed and trusted lookouts to spot danger in time. The British inquiry later described the speed in icy waters as excessive, but on the night itself it felt normal to men trained by a system that rewarded confidence. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet saw the iceberg ahead. He rang the warning bell and telephoned the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship turned and the engines reversed. Titanic began to swing, but she was too large, too close, and moving too quickly. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side. It did not rip the ship open like a giant knife in one continuous wound. The damage was more complicated: seams opened, plates buckled, rivets and joints failed across a long stretch. Water entered multiple forward compartments. Titanic was designed to survive flooding in some combinations of compartments, but not this one. Thomas Andrews, the shipbuilder's designer aboard the voyage, understood the arithmetic. If water rose high enough in the first compartments, it would spill over the tops of the bulkheads into the next, and then the next. The watertight walls did not extend all the way up through the ship. They slowed the flood. They did not stop it. The evacuation revealed the second disaster hidden inside the first. There were not enough lifeboat seats for everyone. Even worse, many boats left partly filled. Officers worried about whether the davits could bear fully loaded boats as they were lowered. Passengers hesitated to leave a lit, seemingly solid ship for small boats hanging high above a black ocean. Crew training was uneven. There had been no full passenger lifeboat drill. So the boats went down with empty space while hundreds remained on deck. Distress calls went out by wireless. The Cunard liner Carpathia turned toward Titanic and drove hard through the night, but she was dozens of miles away. The Californian was closer, stopped in ice, but the signals and rockets were misunderstood, dismissed, or never acted upon with urgency. In the space between those ships, minutes became lives. Titanic settled lower by the bow. The angle of the deck increased. Furniture slid. Machinery groaned. The lights stayed on for a long time, which made the end even more unreal. People were not watching a dark wreck vanish. They were watching a floating city, still illuminated, slowly admitting that its promise had failed. At about 2:20 a.m. on April 15, Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic. More than 1,500 people died. The exact number varies by source because passenger lists and crew records were imperfect, but the scale is beyond dispute. Most of those who entered the freezing water did not survive long enough for rescue. Carpathia arrived after dawn and recovered the survivors from the lifeboats. Photographs of those boats beside the rescue ship show the terrible imbalance at the center of the story, a few small craft carrying the living, while the largest liner in the world was gone. The inquiries that followed found more than one failure. The ship had been traveling too fast for the ice conditions. The lookout was inadequate. Lifeboat rules were outdated. Boats were not filled or managed as they should have been. The Californians' failure to respond remained bitterly controversial. And behind all of it stood a culture that mistook compliance for preparation. Titanic changed maritime safety because it exposed how thin the old assumptions were. After the disaster, international rules moved toward enough lifeboat space for everyone, continuous radio watches, better ice patrols, and stronger emergency procedures. The first safety of life at sea convention came from a world that had finally seen what the old standards cost. But the lesson is not simply that ships need more lifeboats. The deeper lesson is that warnings rarely arrive as one perfect command. They arrive as leaks in the story people want to believe. A regulation that feels sufficient. A message that can be filed away. A speed that worked yesterday. A design limit described as a feature. A lifeboat left half empty because the danger still feels theoretical. Titanic did not sink because nobody had information. It sank because information lost a contest against habit, confidence, image, and time. The warnings were there. They were written in ice reports, lifeboat arithmetic, outdated regulations, and the quiet assumption that the biggest ship in the world would always have one more margin left. It did not.